Okay, so hello and welcome to my presentation, Listen and Produce, using podcasts for conversation. So this presentation basically came about as a result of me wanting to know the impact of using podcasts as the primary teaching tool in a listening and conversation class in an intensive English program. So the plan right now is to share the results of my in-class action research. So, interestingly enough, as I was reviewing previous studies on podcasting, I came across this interesting one by Ferengi et al. Um, and basically, the results of it kind of said that it was not more advantageous to use podcasts as the primary teaching tool, but rather as a supplement to a textbook based class. so, um, in their experiment, they had a control group which did your standard textbook lessons followed by speaking activities. Then they had an experimental group which created podcasts after those textbook lessons and speaking activities, followed by another experimental group which did kind of a flipped classroom type of model where they listened to the podcast outside of class, discussed it in class, and then used the textbook as kind of a supplement, followed by some speaking activities. And then they proceeded with podcast recordings. So the results of this study showed that the first experimental group actually improved more on their speaking skills compared to the other groups. And it was also indicated, as I just mentioned, that better results are achieved through incorporating podcasts within a pre-planned syllabus, including textbook lessons, as opposed to just using them as the main teaching tool. However, I found it very interesting that all throughout this experiment, basically, there was a textbook present. Albeit in varying degrees of integration. So there really was no comparison showing the results of just strictly using a podcast as the main teaching tool. So I really wanted to check out this theory for myself. And although I haven't compared my method to a method where a textbook is used in conjunction with a podcast, I have definitely seen some positive results from the all-in podcasting method that I decided to use, which we will discuss momentarily. But first, let's go ahead and talk about my research questions, or as I like to call them, points of curiosity. So my first point of curiosity was, what are the academic language learning benefits of using podcasting as the primary tool of instruction in a listening and conversation class? Okay, so my suppositions were that students would be able to expand their general vocabulary, become more comfortable listening to native English speaker conversations with greater understanding, associate specific vocabulary with specific conversational topics, better understand idiomatic expressions, and activate their receptive vocabulary skills by remembering certain words and expressions in context. Whew, so that's really quite a hefty load of expectations from one particular teaching tool. However, as Facer and Abdus have indicated, basically podcasts are excellent sources for L2 input. And as we know from a variety of second language acquisition theories, including GAS in 1997 and of course Krashen in 1985, without exposure to input, students will not acquire the morphosyntactic knowledge of the L2, its phonological features, its vocabulary, and or its pragmatic use. So moving on to my second research question, how do students benefit from recording podcast episodes on specific topics every week? Okay, so my supposition was that the students would enhance their speaking confidence over time, increase the use of topic-related vocabulary, promote creativity in their use of the language, and also I thought they might enjoy collaborating with fellow classmates during the pair recordings. Now, In this regard, we do have a few researchers whose findings indicate that some of this is actually possible. Okay, so Swain says that producing output enables learners to process language more deeply. Lawfer says that without pushing students to use less common lexis, it may never become part of their productive knowledge. And finally, Kemp et al. Says that podcasting assignments afforded students opportunities for creativity when writing the audio script and also devising techniques to capture the audience. And my final point of curiosity was, does creating conversations using phrases from the podcast episodes increase retention of the vocabulary? And basically, my supposition was yes. And as Bueno, Alistui, and Nemeth, in their article on Quizlet and podcasting effects on vocabulary acquisition, have stated, students' participation in their own learning material is beneficial for their learning, as students will pay more attention to language, and processing new lexical information more elaborately will lead to higher retention. Okay, so far, so good. All right. In my method, which I'll discuss shortly. The students define vocabulary in groups, as well as produce written conversations using that vocabulary in context, and therefore they're creating and participating in their learning in two very distinct ways. Okay, so let's take a closer look at who our participants are in this experiment. So the students in the intensive English program at LIU on the Brooklyn campus are part of the community at large, and they've migrated to the US for better opportunities. Therefore, their English studies are really essential for them building successful lives here. This research was conducted with 2 intact classes totaling 13 students, ranging in age from 22 to 48, with a median age of 35. There were 10 females, 3 males. As far as their English study, 43% of them had been studying English for 0 to 2 years, and 20% of them from 5 to 7 years. They were the highest level at LIU, which according to CEFR standards, it's a B2 and C1. And as far as their time in the US, 50% of them spent 2 to 3 years here, whereas 30% of them have been here for over 5 years. And then finally, we have an array of 7 diverse mother tongues that were in the class. So from Spanish to Fulani, Crimean Tartar, and then as you can see here, these are the countries that were represented. So let's take a look at the instruments in this experiment. Of course, we have the podcasts, some that were geared towards, specifically towards ESL learners, and those geared specifically towards native English speakers. We have worksheets, a midterm questionnaire, personalized interviews, a vocabulary test, which was actually adapted from the previously mentioned study last year, which tested both their receptive and productive vocabulary skills. And finally, we have an exit questionnaire, and I'll be able to provide links to some of these instruments in the chat. Okay, so what is this method that I have used? Okay, so first I selected podcasts ranging in a scope of topics from the podcast that you saw on the previous slide. I created worksheets including lead-in questions, gist, vocabulary, and then some detailed comprehension questions. And then the students listened to the podcast in class about 2 to 3 times, depending on the difficulty level. They were asked to summarize the main idea of the podcast and post it to our Padlet. And then during the next class, they were asked to listen to the podcast episode again with specific focus on selected vocabulary words and phrases, which led to the producing part of this experiment. So in groups, students entered the meanings of the words and expressions on a Google Doc according to the context of the podcast episode, and then the terms were clarified for the whole class. A homework assignment of recording a 2 to 3 minute episode was given, where they would summarize the content of the week's episode, as well as provide a personal opinion or experience with the situation in that episode. And then individualized feedback was provided via email. I gave them overall comments on the episode as well as language correction, and told them when they used phrases really well. And during the next class, the students are asked to write and perform conversations using half of the expressions from the worksheet. And then finally, at the beginning of the following class, the latest episode containing all of the students' recordings is played for the students to comment on. So let's go ahead and listen to an example of this podcast. Welcome to Season 2 of Yasmeen's English Conversation and Listening Class podcast. Each week, our students summarize and discuss a podcast we've analyzed in class. So happy listening!
Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Alejandra Vadillo and I'm gonna talk to you about this week's podcast, which was dealing with crisis. This podcast was about two work colleagues, a woman and a man, who were going to have a meeting. However, the man said the meeting had to be postponed because he didn't have adequate time for it. He explained to his female colleague how much work he had, all the duties he needed to resolve ASAP, and how he felt about not having time for anything else. In the end, the man agreed to have the meeting as soon as he finished his important work. Dealing with crisis is not an easy thing. We usually lose control, and sometimes we lose control over mental health. I have solved work crises through organizing my time and communicating with my colleagues and bosses. However, for me, dealing with my own crisis, my personal ones, has not been an easy task. I am a young and foreigner woman living in a country whose culture and understanding towards life can be very different. The coronavirus situation had led many people to suffer from different crises. I think the best way to deal with them is through the love of our loved ones. I have never lost contact with my family in Colombia, and here in New York, my husband and I have had each other to remind us of the great things we have accomplished, not only together but also individually. Folks, dealing with crisis is an individual process. So in this episode, I don't want to tell you that my experience will help you with your crisis, but I can tell you that we are never alone when we face with any problem. Always remember all that you have accomplished. Have a nice week, and I will see you next week in another podcast. Bye-bye.
Okay, and now let's go ahead and see how the Anchor app works. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this brief tutorial on how to use Anchor FM to record your podcast. So first you go to the App Store in order to get the free app. And I already have it here, so let's take a look. This is the front page showing my different episodes here. But let's go ahead and go to Tools, because this is where all the magic happens. So when I hit Tools, we can see a variety of the different features for this app. So we have voice messages, which is where your listeners can record any responses to your content. And then we have music from Spotify, which you can use to jazz up your podcast episodes. And then we have Record, which is where all the magic happens. And here you can invite friends to join. I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do that so that students can collaborate by recording together from a distance, which is the whole purpose of this, yes? So when I do this, the audio will go out for a moment, but I would like to show you how it works.
Okay, so as you could see there were a variety of ways that you could invite somebody to participate in your recording, and the other person doesn't necessarily have to have Anchor in order to participate. They can just click on the link and they are automatically invited to record. Now let's take a look at the library. Very important because it's where all of the audio that you record is stored. And the magic here is these three little buttons where you can trim and start and end points. You can edit your audio. You could splice it up, things like that. You can add background music, rename the segment, all of those things. So to just briefly take a look at the trim audio option, you could say, oh, let's start this here. Let's end this here. Okay, so that's just a brief look at that. And then if you don't want to use Spotify, you can use their cute little interlude music here. For your background, or you can use some sounds to transition between your segments. Okay, so now let's go ahead and just do a brief sample of a recording. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Yasmeen's Grammar Class Podcast. All right, now you want to add some background music to that, let's say. Let's go with some nice little skyway there, and we save it, and we can name it Test or whatever you'd like, test for now. You hit add this recording to episode, and I'm going to say not yet because I don't really want to publish this, but if I did want to publish it, I would hit the publish button there. I can enter the title, episode, description, season, episode number, etc. Okay, so I hope that this has given you a nice idea of how to use this app.
Okay, so before we open it up for discussion and any questions you might have, I also assigned a final project to the students where they had to create their very own podcast, including choosing the name, the artwork, the subject matter, and writing the description, the script, everything. So I would like to play one that I particularly enjoyed.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode on Yana's Talk Show. Today is the day. We are having a special guest, my childhood friend Zeleny. Our talking points today will be about careers. Welcome, Zeleny. What did bring us today?
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be here and to collaborate with my lovely friend Yana on this podcast. Today, I'm going to answer some questions about the age when kids and teenagers start talking about their preferences in terms of careers.
Okay, Delaney, so my first question. As a child, what field did you want to be in? What career was more mesmerizing for you at the age, let's say of 5-7?
Well, to begin with, let's remember those days when we were kids. Remember, Jana? You dreamed of being a flight attendant.
Yep, and I'm still dreaming of that.
Oh, wow! It's great to hear that. Personally, I dreamed of being an actress or a famous talk show host. And as you can see, I ended up being an actress.
Yeah, and I really enjoy watching movies in which you perform. What age is good to start thinking upfront about your professional career?
That's an interesting question. Well, in this day and age, kids are different. They have access to the internet. They can read about any career and find any information that they need. But what about us? 20 years ago, we were in the dark about a lot of stuff including careers.
Yeah, you are right. 95% of American teens have access to a smartphone now. But in your opinion, what are some important aspects to look at when choosing a career?
Well, in my point of view, it's related to what your interests, skills, talents, and strengths are. It's also linked to your personality and values.
Okay, let's pretend that I want to be a print journalist, but the wages are too low and they won't be enough to feed the family, pay rent, and all that stuff. What should I do in this situation? Is this a dead end job?
Um, Nowadays, people can access to the internet more quickly and with greater ease than getting the paper. But you have to understand that it's really important to have job security. I'm more than sure that 99.9% of people want to have a good quality of life, or even more, being one of the privileged few.
Yeah, I'm totally agree with you. What great answers you gave us today. Thank you, Delaney. It was a pleasure to talk to you. I hope your answers will help a lot of people who are in the middle of choosing a career.
Thank you, Jana. It was a great pleasure for me to speak about it. Please, you and the audience, check the trailer on my new action movie, The Girl That Caught the Sky. See you next time.
See you, peers. As always, I say, be kind.
Okay, so I have a number of other slides with information regarding the test results and the students' responses to this particular project. However, in the interest of time, I will just be able to provide you with the slides, for that, if you are interested in that information. You have just attended Listen and Produce, using podcasts for conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today.